Today's guest, Axel Sedlmeier.
Pre-work, really thorough pre-work, will make everything that comes after it so much easier. The better you understand the story of why you're recruiting this person, what this person is being searched for, like what are the topics they should really cover, where's the impact they can have in the company, and then also how or where to find these people, something we didn't touch so much on, but like where to find. You can spend a lot of time on that, right? Like different industries, there are the ones that are close at hand. Like if somebody works in fashion, yeah, maybe search for candidates in fashion. But if it's an e-commerce business, maybe broaden it out to other e-commerce businesses. But then if it's has a heavy logistics element in it, then maybe think of logistics companies. And then ideally you find companies that are great in fashion and logistics, like maybe Inditex, who's behind Zara or something, right? Like really get creative in these aspects, but do all these definitions and then start mapping candidates in a thorough way and reach out strategies. Really sit down and spend your time, not do things too quickly and too just, let's talk to this, to that person. But thorough pre-work. And then I think you are usually very well equipped for high quality conversations. Yeah, exactly.
Axel was at Ex-Personio and did executive search at the start of his career and is now at a private equity company, also doing a lot of recruitment, especially in the executive search field. So we talked mainly about the different company stages and how executive searches can look like for a smaller environment, like maybe Series A environment, where you do the first hire of an executive that is a non-founder, up to businesses with 200 million in revenue that hire real executives.
Then you can build trust, and then you can spend less time communicating and more time just getting shit done.
Then I went home and thought about this sentence.
We basically put it on the table.
Hiring takes time. People are trained.
How to objectively judge certain situations.
It's very, 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 very hard to change things.
That was the learning.
Entrepreneurs with empathy.
To the people side.
Morning, Axel. I'm really happy that we have the chance now to do the episode because it's the beauty of the podcast. We met through the podcast because I had Oliver Manulovic as a guest, and then I think you interacted with the post. I reached out to you, we had a chat, and then we did a coffee chat, and then we talked about several stuff, including recruiting, and now we thought about doing an episode, and now we are here. So I'm very happy that we do so. Maybe we start with a short introduction about yourself.
Yeah, hi, good morning, Thomas. Very nice story how we got to get together and how to do this podcast now together. So looking forward to it. And yeah, more than happy to give a quick intro about myself as well. So I'm Axel, and I live in Munich and work in Munich as well, in the south of Germany, and have spent quite some time in recruiting by now. So roughly 10 years, I would say, in the world of recruitment and HR. Have seen different setups. And today I'm working with DEDIQ, a private equity investor here in Munich, with some very interesting portfolio companies and with a very hands-on approach to work with those portfolio companies. And my role is also the talent role, like more holistically from talent acquisition, from employer branding to talent acquisition to talent development and so on. But previously I've seen different setups, like joined from Personio, and that is where the Ollie that you mentioned as well has been working and still is working, I think, in the sales team, and the post that I saw and liked. It was an exciting time as well. And prior to that, worked with Intel, also in the global talent acquisition team, and originally actually worked in executive search. So today I'm focusing a bit more on executive search as well with DEDIQ. In the beginning I did, so that's how the circle closes itself then.
Axel, what is always a different story with people in the recruiting and talent acquisition field? How did you land there? Because that's sometimes out of a sudden.
Yeah, absolutely. And as it is with most people, I would say it's the same for me. Like I landed in recruiting actually through a friend who recommended me basically to try working in this world, right? Because I originally studied actually political sciences and economics, so could have become anything and nothing, I would say, and then ended up, doing a trial period in this executive search company. Liked it really a lot. I found it very interesting, a lot to learn, very enriching experience, I would say, and that's how I more or less stumbled into it, and then somehow recruitment seems to stick like glue sometimes to people, at least to me it did.
Yes, and what is a bit unusual for what I just see when I look at very different talent acquisition professionals, that you started really in executive recruitment, because that's usually maybe something that happens a bit at a later stage. So how did you get that opportunity?
Yeah, it was basically through that network connection that I had that enabled me to do the trial run there, and then they needed basically project managers who would work more or less on the on doing the research on target companies, like creating target company lists, approaching candidates, like classical cold calling really, or reaching out. And I mean, luckily we had LinkedIn and Xing back then already, right? So you didn't need to call that much. But I have to say there was also a big list of phone numbers that I needed to go through and call people, also call network contacts and so on. So I agree. It's usually something that you would do a bit later in your career maybe. And for me back then, it was really learning kind of like the baseline of how the work is done and what is important in this field. But I was quite nervous on some of the calls with the top senior executives, because I was like 25 back then or something. And you can imagine that talking then to, I don't know, CEO or C-level of a company who have like very specific questions, wasn't always easy, but yeah, steep learning curve, I'd say.
Yeah, I definitely agree. But I think for me, I learned the most through executive hires in my career in recruiting, I would say. And because you need to dive and dig deep, you need to structure information in a certain way and be able to, I would say, that deliver insights that are sometimes maybe more complex than with regular searches, I would say. For instance, what I see often when we dive into an example, and then you can tell me your opinion, I would be curious, that it's sometimes really tough for people who are hiring executives. And for me, an executive would be minimum, I would say 250,000 euros in salary. Let's say that level, that sometimes it's hard for the decision maker and also for the panel, first of all, to understand how should the role look like that you can hire a top person into that. And that's already, I think, the most difficult piece to get right, to land a successful hire. How do you see that?
Yeah, I agree, totally agree with you. It's a lot about the willingness to invest in defining the objective and to understand your current situation as a company as well. Like, why do you need this person? What do you need this person for? And also kind of like defining the flight level, really, because I think there is the right kind of people for each phase of a company. So when it's early stage, you need very different executives as well than when you are a large corporation. And not everybody brings the versatility to work in all, or to strive in all of these setups, right? So getting that clarity as the one who's searching, be it from the perspective of you're working in the company, you're trying to hire an executive, or also when you're an agency, and trying to understand quickly what it is that needs to be solved, defining really those objectives, and understanding your own current environment is really key. I couldn't agree more there. And that's what you should spend really a lot of investment and time invest on, because then you can actually also narrow it down to specific type or group of people that would rather work, and also to factors that you might want to watch out for in interviews and that you might want to steer the conversation towards, right? So, definitely agree with what you said.
And then the second piece comes, let's say you have identified some top profiles to talk to, you talk to them, then you need to align the other people that talk to them, that everybody's looking for the same thing, right? Because sometimes a job like CTO, CPO, COO, whatever it is, can look very, very, very different from individual perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very difficult also to take out the bias entirely of interviewing in general, right? So everybody has always their 5 to 10% at least that they're looking for, and which are their personal 5 to 10%. Other than that, standardizing the process as much as possible and talking through this standardization upfront and repeatedly as we go through the process. As you also said, people tend to maybe forget about this or ignore what has been aligned before and then seek for different factors. Definitely agree on that end. And I mean, one thing is for sure, and that doesn't count only for executive searches, I would say in general in recruiting, you learn the most throughout the process. And no process is like the other process, right? So in most of the times you find yourself with a slightly different target view on what you're actually looking for after some months in versus at the very beginning. Because as you say, you learn through the conversations as well. You understand maybe there isn't that talent that I had been dreaming of. Maybe there isn't the purple squirrel, right? Maybe we need to deal with the reality of what the market has to offer also to some extent. And then you start maybe adjusting to some extent. But before you go to that, I agree, probably it's best to just keep everybody accountable and remember them to say to what has been agreed upon in the beginning.
In case you like my show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it.
Axel, how is the executive searches, or how are they, or were they different at Personio in the early stage versus then in the later stage? Because you started there when you were around, I think, 250 people, you said, and you left now with a bit more than 1,000 people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a quite significant difference, I would say. And the question, I think, always at the beginning is for what phase of the company or throughout which phases of the company will you be working with this person, and for how long is it also realistic that somebody will commit to the job? And that needs to be in line with the company objectives, right? A company like Personio, I think it's an open secret that the company grew significantly, basically doubled every year in the last years in terms of, on the one hand, size for some time, but also obviously revenue generation and so on. So really strong growth case. And in this growth phase, I think it was best to find somebody who maybe has seen a setup that is a bit further scaled than that, but who is also hands-on enough to help working on some basic elements and structures. Because most of the functions, I think, and when we talk then about more detailed functions as well, needed to be set up or at least made more efficient, effective, productive, and so on. So this required a lot of hands-on work by executives as well. Versus, I think, in the later stage, it is clear also that the style maybe shifted already a bit more towards managerial, rather making the teams below you successful and steering them. I think that is already a bit of a different mindset, having seen also then much bigger setups, like the chief product and technology officer that was hired back then at Personio came from Meta, for example, which obviously is massive corporation comparing to Personio. So
they then also at some point they are not actively involved in the product. They maybe need to understand it high level, but it's more a bit how to design the organization around that product development piece to deliver, right?
Yeah, exactly. That is definitely, I think, one very important piece, getting the organizational aspect right and really setting them up for success by putting together the right teams. But in the end, it's also all about monetization, right? Like also understanding the product maybe to a level, as you said, not to the last level of detail, but the big buckets that you can monetize, and in the end might be the game changers, whether or not a whole area of products or a whole product segment is successful or not.
And maybe in the beginning, the first product hire of a, let's say, on a management level you make, might be, wow, I do an executive hire now, but it's actually just the first manager that is not the founder.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely right. And also, I think when I joined, and back then, I think we hired a VP for the product space, for example. And at that time, that was the VP for product, and it was for all product managers, basically, right? But then over the years, the structure of the product and engineering organization changed so much that we needed a bunch of VPs. So in the end, while you hire somebody back then as being responsible for everybody, you need to already think about that this person might not be responsible for everything or everybody in this organization anymore, but there will be quite a lot of peers, and there might actually be hired additional executives on top, and also below additional levels might come in, SVP, whatever, right? Like, it's a lot that happens that happened in the company. Yeah.
And at some point, you also need to then consider new factors and attributes like multi-market or multi-product. That's something that in the beginning does not exist, maybe, or maybe just to a small extent, and suddenly this gets really complex. For instance, in a product with compliance, that's also different streams that are coming then, where you maybe need different executives, but it's not that simple that you say, okay, I for actually one hire, I have a formula that is always the same. Yeah, I think you can use certain standards and frameworks, and you should use that also to ensure quality. But each role there is so individual that every search is kind of a new search.
You're absolutely right. I think you have your criteria that you can always look at and that you can maybe apply a couple of times, like functional expertise, managerial experience that somebody brings to the table, general management philosophy, these kind of things. But then you have so many aspects that are maybe situational to some extent, as you said, like when at a certain point in time, a company decides to enter completely new markets or completely new product spaces. At Personio, the example was maybe the payroll function that was big part of the product, and all of a sudden you have all these financial elements that come into play.
That was maybe never really a main attribute to look for, right? And suddenly you need that.
Exactly, and it requires also somebody with a completely different kind of like background, ideally as well, right? And then also I would say what has shifted probably a bit in the last years is the whole culture element as well, that companies just invest also so much more in their own culture, in their own identity, in their employer brand as well, right? And then finding somebody who you see a lot in line with these values, with these principles that you define, is particularly on the executive level absolutely key, I think, because they have such a big responsibility and they are responsible for such a big part of a business, and the bigger the business, the bigger that impact is. And then if you will need somebody, or you want usually somebody who top down can, be an authenticator kind of like for this culture and a carrier and somebody who fosters that. And I think that's something where at least also at Personio, on any hire, by the way, we looked very much into the whole topic of, is this person somebody who carries or shares to a big extent our values, our cultures, and ideally will also add to it, obviously, as we go.
Important point. How do you evaluate the cultural aspect or the personality fit aspect in an executive search?
Yeah, interesting question. I think in general, it's not as easy to evaluate for culture and values, I would say, because it's quite subjective often. It's again what you said in the beginning, a bit of a perceptual topic. Somebody makes a statement and a person might understand it in way A and another person understood B, and it's completely different how they perceived it. Yet the way we did it back then was we had specific culture interviews, basically, where we focused more on where we gave the candidates situational examples, and where we let them describe how they dealt in specific situations, with the idea, obviously, that the historic data or the anecdotal data they give would let us come to conclusions on how they would behave in the future. It's a bit the math that you're trying to do here. Also bringing them together with as many people as possible. When we talk executive level, it was really not all interviews, but then you just put them together for a lunch, right? Business lunch. You get to meet 6 people from the team or 5. I think there's also a maximum of people that you should meet. Otherwise, it will be very difficult. But yeah, business lunch or even after our events, just make them part of it already. The more far we are down in the interviewing process already, but particularly towards the end, making sure that you bring them together with other people from the team, other senior stakeholders, executives from other areas, and maybe even some of the investors every now and then who would just have a chat.
Once I sat together with another executive search colleague, and we were talking a bit about this. And then he shared a story that once a client, it was a family business, looked for an executive team that was not family members, so external hires, and a big step for a family business. So what they did, they did not really looked at the time to hire aspect, but they wanted to really get this piece of evaluation right. So I think when you have the component time that can be flexible, the chance to evaluate the value add fit better is, I think, higher. Because the more time spent, the more data points you gather, that your intuition is shaped in the right way. So they invited the executives they interviewed at a later stage, of course, to their office in a hotel. And then with the whole family. And then after the stay, the business owners went to the hotel staff, to the cleaning staff, to the receptionist, so to the whole lowest frontline level type of profiles in the hierarchy, and asked them, would you work for this person? What was your impression? Just to see how they deal with any kind of level in terms of the company, because it was so important to them. And I think that's a bit sneaky, but well played.
Definitely. It's a very nice way of assessing, I think, because it shows, I think it is a very authentic environment then, right? Like people wouldn't behave, they would behave differently if they knew. You don't let them know, so they behave the way they would usually behave, and then you can afterwards ask people a question like, hey, how excited are you, or how did this person treat you? And I agree, and I think you're right that the less time is a criterion, that the more data you collect. And then I think also there is this turning point though when you start maybe over evaluating, and maybe at some point you face the sad reality that we're not going to find anybody. Maybe we need to rethink our strategy, right? I also had that in the past when we were like trying to find somebody also for a business that had been run basically by the owners for many years, and then finding a successor is quite difficult, I would say, as well. And then at some point you realize, okay, this will just not really lead to a situation in which everybody has a great feeling about this. And we're not excited. And we kept asking a similar question as you just also described, like who is excited? Who is excited when thinking about this candidate, for example, starting here? And who can imagine that when the candidate starts, that they will help right away different people in the organization and can help them solve their problems? And we never were able to answer that with a clear, yes, we're all excited. And if you don't find any majorities there, or a common ground, more or less, actually, then you should probably refrain from making a hire as well, because as you probably also know, right, like bad hire, and then particularly on an executive level, can probably be like very painful for a business.
I also get this point. I just think it can be also dangerous to have certain things in place like that, because what is the trap I think you open yourself up to is somebody who can excite people will be then more likely to be hired. If that's part of the job, perfect. But especially with executives, I think they are super good in framing certain things in a certain way for an individual in a conversation. And this is why I think it's also important to always brief and debrief on both sides in executive hiring, that you take out, so that you take out first unnecessary ambiguity, because there is so much things you could discuss and you just have a short period of time and you should focus and really focus on the relevant stuff. And of course, it's important that both sides are prepared, in my opinion.
In case you have any feedback or anything you want to share with me, please send me an email on thomas@peoplewise.com or hit me up on LinkedIn. And in case you really enjoy the show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it.
On the other hand, it can also be dangerous that people just sugarcoat or pretend to do something because they're good in pretending, because sometimes executives get good in that, that you then not have somebody sitting there who is just good in pitching themselves or pretending to be good at something, and then at the end on the ground are not good at something. I think that's also something what is super difficult to anticipate if you go for excitement.
Absolutely, yeah. I couldn't agree more. Like, I think excitement needs to be differentiated in like really excitement in the sense of I feel like I want to follow this person, and just like general, okay, excitement in the sense of like, yes, very positive about this candidate, right? And in general, I totally agree. I've made experiences in the past as well where we interviewed as the interviewing team candidates who were very good in that first part of like, yes, I want to follow this person and seems like a great, like visionary almost. But when you then listen to the nuances, turned out that maybe there was something below that was also very important for the client or for the company at that time, but that person would not care about necessarily. And there could have been things like somebody who is only driven by, for example, monetizing product features and trying to get the maximum out of it and squeeze it, but not necessarily super interested in building an organization and caring for, the org health and so on, but rather full high performance culture and so on. And then if you identify this culture clash, basically, you need to get latest then really cautious, clearly address it with the interviewing team. Are you the only one who had that perception, or do we have other pointers in that direction that would, allow a conclusion? Then, so agree.
And I think also one piece is if the more diverse in terms of personality type your panel is to evaluate, I think the less risky it is to also go for excitement or something like this, because different people are excited to a different extent of the same thing, right? So that's
Absolutely.
also a healthy thing to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the setup of the panel is really very crucial as well, because in the end, if you just have the people whose opinion you basically anyways know because you've been working alongside them for years and have assessed candidates alongside them for years, you're getting what you're expecting to get, right? So taking in every now and then, or actually regularly, additional people that maybe haven't done any of this previously, super valuable, I think, to a process. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So if you would give any final tips to people out there doing executive hiring, what would that be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you can start on many different, or you can look at it from many different angles probably to give tips. But I think a bit what we discussed in the beginning as well, like the pre-work, really thorough pre-work, will make everything that comes after it so much easier. The better you understand the story of why you're recruiting this person, what this person is being searched for, like what are the topics they should really cover, where's the impact they can have in the company, and then also how or where to find these people, something we didn't touch so much on, but like where to find. You can spend a lot of time on that, right? Like different industries, there are the ones that are close at hand. Like if somebody works in fashion, yeah, maybe search for candidates in fashion. But if it's an e-commerce business, maybe broaden it out to other e-commerce businesses. But then if has a heavy logistics element in it, then maybe think of logistics companies. And then ideally you find companies that are great in fashion and logistics, like maybe Inditex, who's behind Zara or something, right? Like really get creative in these aspects, but do all these definitions and then start mapping candidates in a thorough way and reach out strategies. Really sit down and spend your time, not do things too quickly and too just, let's talk to this, to that person. But thorough pre-work. And then I think you are usually very well equipped for high quality conversations. Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Cool, Axel. Who is a guest that you know and I don't know yet that I should interview next?
Yeah, I think we chatted about this. Probably I would recommend my fiancée, Carolina, who is running the global employer branding teams and sourcing teams at HelloFresh.
Definitely, yeah. I think we are already even connected. We just did not schedule an episode yet.
Yeah, we've been busy. We moved recently houses, so I think now it's getting maybe a bit easier towards the end of the year.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Axel, for your time, and I really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise. Thank you, Thomas.